Mr. Chairman, and the way I read it too, is, so Management Council created the regulatory reduction and mental health task forces, but they only created them for the 23 interim. So they don't exist anymore. I don't know legally whether this language actually creates those task forces or not, or whether it just appropriates funds for them.
So I'll have to have a management council.
Could we add language that says for the legislators, so it says there's appropriate. Can we do that?
Yeah, you bet. And if you want us to come up with language for for creating and then continuing these task forces, we certainly can.
Mr. Chairman, just for clear, this only appropriates money, the way I read language. I know there's a logic flow through. If you appropriate money, then you must be saying to do it, but I don't know that that's clear. Especially when we have another section, if we keep that says you gotta have 2/3 to create a task force. And I just throw that out there, that if we're gonna create them and appropriate money for those two, then this would read any additional besides the regulatory reduction and the et cetera. So maybe I'm trying to be too nuanced, but I want it to be clear when we go to the bodies that we are both creating and appropriating money. And then any further action requires whatever vote of Management Council. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's why this language might be appropriate. I know we're talking about just the differences between the chambers, but if we say the continuation of these two task forces, then if we keep this additional language in there, then we can clarify any newly created or additional. So I think this is clarifying positions of both chambers. But that's just my read on it, and I look at Matt and Elisota. Tell me that I'm wrong.
Go ahead, Matt.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I think that works. I think if we put continuing in there and then clarify in the language that any additional task forces, that it would clearly, that the regulatory reduction in mental health and vulnerable adult task force would be off the table then. They would be continued through legislative action, not just through action of Management Council, but then any additional task forces that would be created by Management Council would take that 2/3 vote.
I mean, the only worry is setting a precedent long-term that any creation has to take 2/3 of a Management Council vote. But I think we all agree it should come before the body in general. We shouldn't just be creating task forces in Management Council. People want to study issues, it should be, brought up through the process and not arbitrarily assigned, so.
Mr. Chairman, I would say we've strayed so far away from that. The one task force bill, I brought it as a bill. So to even see this in the feed, like, I feel like we're very, very far away from what we should be doing.
Generally agree. Yeah.
Mr.
So
Chairman.
here's the trouble that I have with this whole discussion. So the amendment says effective immediately, right?
Yeah.
The rest of the bill, which includes the language in section 15, is it shall not lapse, it's effective immediately too. So both the bill and the amendment say effective immediate. Does that change anything? So if we go to section 15 of the engrossed version, I don't know what section it is now in the amended version, but it still says any appropriation containing this as effective immediately shall not lapse. There's a level of redundancy in there now that do we need them both? And it gets back to the issue, one's appropriating and one's authorizing. And I guess I'm asked the House, was that the intent? Was it to authorize the task force or just fund the task force?
I'm not even sure, is this a 2-year funding and a continuation or a 1 year? I think the testimony, I don't remember the regulatory bill if it was for 1 extra year or 2 extra years, but we were really just trying to continue for 1 more year on the House bill side.
But based on this, it continues it for 2 years.
I think that's right. So how about at the end of each, the Regulatory Reduction Task Force is hereby continued until December 31st of 2024.
I think that's okay with our side, that we want 1 more year. I don't know if we need 2 more years of mental health. Maybe regulatory direction does so.
Well, I
Well, then,
guess,
Mr. Chairman, what that would do then is the shelf life of these 2 task forces is only 1 year. The shelf life of the 2/3 requirement is 2 years. So then these task forces would need, if they wanted to go for a 3rd year each, they would need to come back in front of council or through the
Or
legislature
through the right process.
and get that 2/3 vote.
I think that's fair to limit them to 1 year each, and that way, by the end of the year, they can decide with the new legislature if it should be in a bill, and the whole body should be able to vote and talk about them instead of it just continuing for 2 years.
So if we do that and we say this is a continuation, we make explicitly clear that these are authorized with this legislation. If we're gonna do that, I wanna leave the 2/3 plus the emergency language in there.
For anything this year or for the 2025?
Well, that runs through the duration of the 2-year budget cycle. So after that, it's no longer effective.
The only question is that set a precedent long-term that it continues. Representative Young?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I am very hesitant to bind the next
Or
legislature
not.
for at least 1 year, are we not?
Well, they could bring a bill.
Well, we're binding them right now to an obligation to continue a task force that they didn't have a chance to vote on too. So it works both ways.
actually, so, Mr. Chairman and committee, it seems like, how about we do this? How about we extend or here's a potential. What if we make the effective date immediately for both these task forces through 2024, period? Both of these cannot bring a bill on their own, so they'll have to go through another committee. And we'll have a general session between now and then, and there can be an opportunity to bring a bill to extend them both, just like there was a bill in this past session for both. So those 2 are taken care of for this next interim, and they go forward. So that's for those 2, with the other less money, all the other stuff that goes to it. So then I'm going to bring up something else. So that's just a suggestion on the effective immediately and a time limiter. It doesn't go into the next legislature. It's actually, the next legislature has to take action if they want to continue it.
Yep.
The second thing I would also ask about, though, is because we're taking out the language about the governor appointees and paying their mileage, should we have some further clarifying language about extending the opportunity for the governor to appoint a like number of members? Because we're not doing anything with this except saying we're going to have a task force. We're appropriating money. We're not putting a number on it or anything.
If you say continuation, would that cover the current members and the motion from last year in Management Council? If we're continuing to 2023? Instead of having to spell it all out, if we
So we
said
just say continuation of
Continue
the,
as it exists
as we understand it.
or as
Continuation.
existed in
Okay.
2023.
Okay.
So for 14 and 15, Mr. Chairman, if I could, for 14 and 15, so we're doing a continuation, not paying for the continuation of that, paying for ourselves, dropping the dollar amount, and it's effective immediately until the end of the current calendar year. I'm just throwing it out there.
Can we agree on that? I think the House would agree on that, the Senate does, on that part.
No, I think we can agree on that.
And then I'm not gonna speak to the other part. I'll let the majority floor leader deal with the other part. I'm just trying to get this piece.
Okay. We're agreed on that piece.
So we've created the task force. We funded the task force.
The end of this year.
So we've adopted all of the House positions on that. That's,
Less money
Less than money, but
and
yeah.
less time.
well, the money is not, it's,
I mean, I would think the Senate should be very happy that we kept the Regulatory Reduction Task Force somewhere, so it had a vote by the body of the House. So when you say it's the House, I mean,
Well,
we did it for the good of the order for both bodies. I know there's a bill that didn't go forward, but we don't consider that a House position. We consider that a trying to keep
Yeah, I understand.
management council's
So
position
I'm just trying
alive.
to get to the issue here, so what's, it's only for the life of this budget. It's 2 years, the life of that 2/3 an emergency. After that, it goes completely away. So what possibly could you foresee that's gonna happen the second year of the biennium that would preclude management council under either one of those scenarios from forming? If it's truly emergency, it should require 2/3 vote.
And I think the issue is the precedent it sets, not that I can think of anything. Representative Young?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I don't think that there necessarily could be something that is an emergency where we couldn't get 2/3 to vote on it. I don't want the precedent of binding the next legislature to the 2/3 within the budget, as well as, then we also get this dichotomy of what do our rules say versus what do our statutes say, and then they're going to be in conflict as well. And so I do think that there should be some hesitancy on this sort of amendment being put into the fee bill.
Because the select committee would still just be a majority, right? I mean, the select committee then is being treated differently as a task force. You'd have to, management council, can they create a select committee? Can they only create a task force only? Can management create, they can create a subcommittee of legislators
And a select committee.
and a select committee.
Yes, I think that's 288105 that says they can create a select committee upon a finding that either they need the expertise to do so, or it'd be more work than what an interim committee could do, or if an interim committee is not getting its work done. But it's pretty clear in that language that it is a committee of the legislature, not a broader
Task force,
membership.
it's strictly legislative members.
That's right.
Mr. Chairman?
So,
This is where I come down. I've never served on management council. Last year, we had the Indian Child Welfare Act codification bill, and then I brought a separate bill that said we need an ICWA task force. Timely, important, all of those things needed to go, but I had to go make that case to the chambers. So what really bothers me is when a very small number of people on management council get to sit back and say, I want $55,000, when the rest of us that aren't in that position have to go peddle our idea and go work our idea like we should. That's where I get really picky about creating management council task forces at all. I told my leader here how uncomfortable I am even with the emergency thing, because I think there's no end to that. Oh, this is an emergency, this is an emergency. Suicide's been a problem for our state for a long time. Is it an emergency? There are people that would say 100% absolutely, and others that say, no, this is an ongoing problem with no silver bullet. How is that an emergency? So that wording gets really squishy. I'm just telling you on the other side of it, to back my majority floor leader, I don't like that management council can kind of create them at all. So for me, the precedent, I think we're already too far down the path where you guys want to go, and I think that a 2-year pause is reasonable. I'm just telling you, like, that's in my gut, how I feel.
I second everything as another person that brought a task force bill that went through the entire process last year. And I sit on management council, so, well said, Senator Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have maybe a little different approach to this issue. What if we actually say that management council can only expend funds appropriate to participate in gubernatorial, for legislature to participate in gubernatorial created task force that would requiring a 2/3 vote and creation of it and to deal with the thing. So because.
So you want to bifurcate the emergency into 2/3? I don't know if I heard you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. So I'm kind of leaning toward where we're going with this. A task force is a legislative and legislative and non-legislative. Often they are started by the executive branch. Now we're kind of in the business a little bit. Maybe we step away from that a little bit and say, we will participate, we can use funds to participate in a gubernatorial created task force based on a 2/3 vote of management council. That way, we're not creating the Kansas Council. Governors come to legislature and said, hey, this is important, will you participate with us? I just throw it out there, this is a very different approach, but.
And I like the idea, other than it still allows management council to go do their own task force.
we could stop management council from doing task forces. They could still do select committees, but like the BLM plan, that was a,
Gubernatorial.
but who, are we funding the legislative members on that? The governor's office is totally funding our legislators. We are funding legislators.
You know, if you remember, we've increased that with management council policy says now, with the approval of the presiding officers, if you are appointed to a executive or judicial branch task force, you can receive mileage and per diem from the legislature. I think the executive branch has had a problem with, well, how do we pay for a legislative member out of our money to do that? So for a lot of time, you know, legislators weren't getting compensated at all for their time on that, and council just didn't think that was fair.
Mr. Chairman?
Go
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I would agree. So another example, the Missing Murdered Indigenous Person Task Force. There were people whose feelings were wildly hurt, legislators, because they weren't appointed to it, but I kept telling folks, well, it's an executive-led effort. This, you know, us serving on that is awkward. I like the idea of, you know, if the governor wants it and it's an emergency, that's created, and then we pay for our participation. I think the idea has merit.
So I like that provision, but explain to me again, Eric, I'm a little slow, you know, talk slow, I'm a legislator. Where is the prohibition then against management council establishing task force?
Mr. Chairman, so we'll just have it. We'll just, I mean, we can still have the legislature cannot comprise one without 2/3, period. Or you can have all those things, providing that they can approve participation by legislatures in a gubernatorial task force.
Okay, so we
with a
still have
majority
the
vote.
2/3 of management council.
Absolutely. I mean, I mean, that's where I would say you can do both.
Yeah, and so,
Thank you.
okay. I would be good with that, I think.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I mean, maybe I'll throw out one other possibility. What if we limit which amendment is it? The Hicks Senate, the second reading amendment number 2. What if we limit it to just 2024, and then with the intent that management council discuss a bill on how we create select committees and or task forces?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I think that idea has merit. However, when you say we're going to bind future legislators, all they have to do is come back in January and they pass a bill that says this supersedes, or it would supersede it once you pass it. So I don't think we need to be splitting hairs on that. And then if they don't get to it, they don't get to it. But we're supposed to be doing biennial planning, biennial budgeting. That's why we have the 2-year thing. So, you know, if someone wants to interrupt it, but I prefer to go 2 years.
So the offer on the table is to leave the Hicks Amendment with the addition of the legislative branch will pay for legislative members on any gubernatorial called task force. Is that what I'm understanding?
With the majority vote?
Mr. Chairman, could we get a clarification, Matt? That's what we do now? Is that a policy? Is that a rule? What is that, Matt? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Mr. Chairman, management council just updated their travel policy to state that upon approval of the presiding officer, or if appointed by the presiding officer, a member serving on an executive or judicial branch, task force can receive mileage and per diem for their work on that task force. So what will happen, as you know, is that, you know, the governor gives us a list of task forces and we put them in our appointment spreadsheet. And then the presiding officers know they need to pick 2 members or 1 member or 3, whatever it is. And for those members appointed then by their presiding officer, they can receive mileage and per diem for their work on those task forces.
Well, gentlemen.
Maybe salary too, I can't quite remember.
We've got to move this discussion if we're going to meet our deadline. So we're willing to go with you, create the task force, fund the task force, eliminate the 10,000 and the duty that we pay the governors. And so would hope that you guys can come along with this proposal and we can get this resolved and get it typed up. Where you at?
So Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, that the two task force are for the remainder of 2024.
For the remainder.
Is that
of
accurate?
2024.
I just want to make sure. So would, and Mr. Jorfo, I'm not running this
No.
by you, so.
Restate it.
What if we made section 14 the same, effective for the remainder of 2024, and the next management council can adopt a policy, and we can say that, the next management shall adopt a policy regarding task forces.
I'd be good with that.
But for now, make it 2/3 for the remainder of this year.
Yep, just like the task force.
I would be okay with that.
Yep, we can agree to that.
Mr. Chairman, I just want it to noted, that is a concession on my part, but let's get her done.
You missed the last one before you got here.
You don't come to the first meeting, you gotta.
So that, well, it's the Senate, so you'll get that up and
Matt,
sign
you'll
it.
draft that up,
Well, let's go over this real quick.
so we know what we're drafting.
Yeah, so starting with the task forces, going to move the appropriation down, and I would say since you're only making it for 1 year, why don't we go 20,000 on both of those? We can go 20,000 on those appropriations. Remove the language providing for mileage and per diem to the members of the Regulatory Reduction Task Force appointed by the governor. But we create a new sentence at the end of each section that says, and this is for the regulatory reduction, the Regulatory Reduction Task Force is hereby authorized and continued as it existed during the 2023 interim. It's authorized as it existed during the 2023 interim and continued until December 31st, 2024. Okay, so make the exact same changes to the Mental Health and Vulnerable Adult Task Force. And then on the Senate amendment on the creation of task force, the Management Council shall only expend funds appropriated in this act to create additional task forces comprised of legislators and non-legislators upon a 2/3 vote of the appointed members of Management Council, finding that an emergency exists in the state of Wyoming, necessitating the creation of a task force through December 31st, 2024. Is that what you came up with? Okay. And then another sentence that Management Council shall adopt a policy on creation of task forces.
This, well, can we make a Mr. Chairman, can we make a recommendation to the
May,
May.
to the 68th legislature? We're not talking about this
Yeah, we
legislature.
can't tell them. So I don't see the part in there about the 2/3 required vote to establish another for this year.
The remainder of 2024.
I don't know, I was reading real fast, but create an additional task forces comprised of legislators and non-legislators upon a 2/3 vote of the appointed members of Management
For
Council.
emergency purposes.
Yeah, I'm not changing any part of what the language
Okay,
was.
so we're leaving
except-
that in there.
Right, except
Okay.
for just adding additional
Yep.
to
And
it.
additional is the only new language in that.
Well,
Create-
right, and then that new sentence.
Yeah, at
and
the end.
then-
Okay, thank
And then
you.
we're gonna make it effective immediately too, right?
Yep.
Okay.
For the remainder of
2024.
Do we need to vote on that, Matt, at this time, or just wait and sign the conference committee?
Yeah,
report?
I think we've memorialized what the agreement was. I'll get it typed up and then you guys can sign it.
Thank you.
All right, okay. We good with that? All right,
Pleasure doing business with you.
thank you, guys.
Right over.
Executive branch item, so